The sound of shattering ceramic echoed through Moonlight Cafe as the coffee pot exploded against the floor, sending scalding liquid across worn linoleum and splashing onto Amelia's trembling legs. Cruel laughter filled the air as Jessica Collins and her friends watched the overweight waitress scramble to clean up the mess they had caused. But in the back corner booth, a man who had killed for less than this insult slowly rose from his seat, his dark eyes promising violence. Dante Moretti had come to this forgotten diner to escape the blood on his hands from earlier that evening. He never expected to witness something that would make him want to spill more. 3 hours earlier, Dante had been a different man in a different world. The rain that now hammered against the cafe windows had been washing the blood from his knuckles as he stood over the body of a traitor in a warehouse across town. His organization had been betrayed, his trust shattered, and his response had been swift and brutal. The man who had sold information about Dante's operations to rival families would never speak again. But now, watching this gentle waitress being humiliated by women who wouldn't last 5 minutes in his world, Dante felt a different kind of rage building in his chest. This wasn't about territory or money or respect in the criminal underworld. This was about something more fundamental, the strong preying on the weak simply because they could. The evening had started innocently enough. Dante had walked into Moonlight Cafe seeking nothing more than shelter from the storm and a quiet place to think. The small diner was nearly empty, just an elderly man reading a newspaper and a young couple sharing dessert, perfect for a man who needed to disappear for a few hours. When Amelia had approached his table with that genuine smile and kind eyes, something inside Dante had shifted. In his world, every smile was calculated, every kindness had a price. But this woman, this soft-spoken waitress with tired eyes and gentle hands, had offered him coffee and pie with no agenda, no fear, no expectation of anything in return. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" she had asked, and for the first time in years, Dante had felt like a human being instead of a monster. He had watched her work, moving between tables with quiet efficiency and genuine care. She refilled the old man's coffee without being asked, checked on the young couple with motherly concern, and treated every customer like they mattered. In Dante's world, people mattered only as long as they were useful. Here, in this humble cafe, he was witnessing something he had almost forgotten existed, simple human kindness. Then Jessica Collins had burst through the door like a hurricane of entitlement and cruelty. Dante had recognized the type immediately. Wealthy, beautiful, used to getting whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. The kind of people who believed their money and status gave them the right to destroy others for entertainment. He had dealt with their husbands and fathers in business, men who thought their legitimate wealth made them untouchable, until they needed favors that only someone like Dante could provide. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal cruelty, and it was being directed at the one person in this entire city who had shown him genuine kindness without knowing who he was or what he could do for her. "Oh my God, girls, look who it is!" Jessica's voice had cut through the peaceful atmosphere like a knife. "Amelia Rodriguez, still working in this dump, I see?" Dante had watched Amelia's face go pale, seeing the way her hands trembled slightly as she approached the table with menus. But she had maintained her dignity, her professionalism, even as Jessica launched into a vicious attack designed to humiliate her in front of everyone present. The words that followed had made Dante's blood run cold. These women were dissecting Amelia's past, her pain, her loneliness, like vultures picking at a carcass. They spoke of high school humiliations, of cruel pranks, of a young girl who had dared to hope someone might care about her, only to have that hope crushed for their amusement. And through it all, Amelia had endured. She had taken their abuse with quiet strength, trying to do her job, trying to maintain her dignity in the face of deliberate cruelty. Dante had seen grown men break under less pressure than this woman was handling with grace. But when Jessica had deliberately tripped her, when the coffee pot had shattered and the scalding liquid had splashed across Amelia's legs, when the laughter had erupted at her pain and humiliation, that was when Dante Moretti stopped being a customer and became something far more dangerous. The scrape of his chair against the floor cut through Jessica's delighted laughter like a gunshot. Every head in the diner turned toward the back booth, where the most feared man in the city slowly rose from his full height, his presence filling the room like gathering thunder. Jessica's laughter died in her throat as she looked into eyes that had watched men die without flinching. Her friends fell silent, suddenly aware that something had shifted in the room, that the temperature had dropped and the air had become charged with menace. Dante began walking toward their table, each footstep echoing in the sudden silence. His hands hung loose at his sides, but Jessica could see the violence coiled in his movements, the predatory grace of a man who never lost a fight because he never fought fair. The most powerful man in the city was about to teach these women what real fear looked like.
15 years earlier, the cafeteria at Lincoln High School buzzed with the usual chaos of teenage life. Students clustered around tables according to their social status, the popular kids near the windows, the athletes by the vending machines, the theater kids in their own corner. And there, at a small table in the far back, sat 14-year-old Amelia Rodriguez, eating her lunch alone. She had learned to time her arrival perfectly. Too early, and she would have to endure the stares as the cafeteria filled up around her. Too late, and every table would be claimed, leaving her to stand awkwardly with her tray until a teacher took pity on her. So she came at exactly 12:15, found her usual spot, and ate her sandwich while reading a book to avoid making eye contact with anyone. "Look at her over there," Jessica Collins whispered loudly to her friends at the popular table. "Does she really think reading makes her interesting?" Amelia's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes on the pages. She had learned that reacting only made things worse. If she ignored them, sometimes they would get bored and move on to someone else. But Jessica was never one to be ignored. "I heard her mom packs her lunch because they can't afford the cafeteria food," another girl chimed in. "My dad says her mother cleans offices downtown. Can you imagine?" The words hit Amelia like physical blows. Her mother Carmen worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after Amelia's father had left when she was 8. Carmen cleaned offices at night, worked at a grocery store during the day, and took in sewing on weekends. She packed Amelia's lunch with love and care, always including a little note that said, "You are my sunshine," or "Make today beautiful, mija." "At least she's consistent," Jessica continued, her voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Consistently pathetic." The laughter that followed made Amelia's stomach twist. She closed her book and stood up, her lunch barely touched. As she walked toward the trash can, she heard Jessica's final blow. "Where are you going, Amelia? Don't you want to sit with us?" "Oh, wait, I forgot. Nobody wants to sit with you." That afternoon, Amelia walked home through the rain, tears mixing with the droplets on her face. She found her mother in their tiny kitchen, still in her grocery store uniform, preparing dinner with ingredients that had been marked down for quick sale. "How was school today, mija?" Amelia asked, looking up with tired but loving eyes. Amelia forced a smile. "It was fine, Mama. How was work?" Carmen studied her daughter's face, seeing through the lie immediately. She set down her wooden spoon and pulled Amelia into a warm embrace that smelled like vanilla and hard work. "Listen to me, Amelia," Carmen whispered, holding her daughter tight. "Those children who hurt you, they don't know what real beauty is. They see only the outside, but God made you beautiful on the inside where it matters most. Your heart is pure gold, mija. Never let anyone make you forget that." "But Mama, what if they're right? What if I'm just—" "No." Carmen's voice was firm but gentle. "You are kind. You are smart. You are strong. And someday, someone will see all of that and love you exactly as you are. Until then, you love yourself because you are worthy of love." The years that followed were a blur of similar moments. Amelia learned to navigate high school like a ghost, invisible when possible, resilient when visibility was unavoidable. She threw herself into her studies, volunteering at the local animal shelter and helping her mother with her sewing work. While other girls went to parties and dated, Amelia built a fortress of self-reliance around her heart. When prom season arrived, senior year, Amelia had made peace with spending the evening at home with her mother, watching old movies and eating popcorn. She had no expectations, no hopes that might be crushed. But then, Tommy Reeves approached her locker one Tuesday morning. Tommy was handsome in an average way, not popular enough for Jessica's crowd, but not unpopular enough to be completely invisible. He had kind eyes and a nervous smile as he shifted from foot to foot beside her locker. "Hey, Amelia," he said quietly. "I was wondering, would you maybe want to go to prom with me?" Amelia's heart stopped. She looked around, expecting to see Jessica and her friends hiding nearby with cameras, ready to capture her humiliation. But the hallway was relatively empty, just a few students hurrying to class. "Are you serious?" she whispered. "Yeah, I am. I think you're really sweet, and I'd love to take you." For one shining moment, Amelia allowed herself to believe. She imagined herself in a beautiful dress, dancing under twinkling lights, feeling normal and wanted and special. She imagined her mother's joy at seeing her daughter finally included. "Yes," she breathed, "I'd love to go." Tommy's smile seemed genuine as he promised to pick her up at 7. Amelia floated through the rest of the day, already planning what dress she might be able to afford, how she would do her hair. That evening, she told her mother the news. Carmen cried happy tears and immediately began planning, talking about borrowing money for a dress, about doing Amelia's makeup, about taking pictures. But Friday afternoon, everything came crashing down. Amelia was walking past Jessica's locker when she heard the laughter, the cruel, familiar sound that had haunted her for years. "I can't believe she actually said yes," Tommy's voice carried clearly. "You should have seen her face. She looked like someone had just told her she won the lottery." "This is going to be even better than I thought," Jessica replied. "Make sure you get pictures when you don't show up. I want to see her face when she realizes it was all a joke." Amelia's world shattered. She pressed herself against the wall, listening to them plan her humiliation in detail. They had orchestrated the entire thing, the shy approach, the nervous smile, the promise of a magical evening, all of it designed to give her hope so they could watch it die. She never confronted Tommy. She never told her mother what she had heard. On prom night, she simply told Carmen she wasn't feeling well and spent the evening in her room, listening to her mother's disappointed sighs through the thin walls. That night, as rain pelted her bedroom window, Amelia made herself a promise. She would never again allow herself to hope for something she couldn't control. She would be kind, she would be strong, but she would never again be vulnerable. Now, 9 years later, standing in Moonlight Cafe with coffee soaking through her uniform and Jessica's laughter ringing in her ears, Amelia remembered that promise. She had kept it faithfully, building a life of quiet service and careful distance. But as she knelt to clean up the shattered ceramic, she couldn't help but wonder if protecting her heart was also meaning closing it off from any chance of real happiness.
The silence in Moonlight Cafe was deafening as Dante Moretti approached Jessica's table with the measured pace of a predator. His footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, each one seeming to drain the warmth from the room. The elderly man in the corner had stopped pretending to read his newspaper, his eyes wide with the instinctive recognition that something dangerous was unfolding. The young couple huddled closer together, sensing the shift in atmosphere, even if they couldn't understand it. Jessica's confident smirk faltered as she looked up at the man towering over their table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive black coat that spoke of wealth and power. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Dark, cold and completely devoid of the admiration she was used to seeing from men. "Ladies," Dante said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made grown men confess their sins, "I believe you owe someone an apology." Jessica's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but Jessica herself tried to maintain her composure. She was used to getting her way with men, used to her beauty opening doors and excusing her behavior. "Excuse me," she said, attempting a flirtatious smile. "I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Jessica Collins." She extended her manicured hand, expecting him to take it, to fall under her spell like so many others had. Dante didn't even glance at her outstretched hand. Instead, he looked past her to where Amelia was still kneeling on the floor, carefully picking up pieces of broken ceramic while trying to avoid the puddle of hot coffee that had soaked through her uniform. "The woman you just humiliated," Dante continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, but somehow filling the entire diner. "She's been nothing but professional and kind to you, and you've repaid that kindness with cruelty." Jessica's smile became strained. She wasn't used to being ignored, especially not from men who looked like they could afford to give her the lifestyle she craved. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Amelia and I are old friends from high school. We were just catching up." "Friends don't deliberately trip each other," Dante replied, his gaze finally settling on Jessica with an intensity that made her shrink back in her chair. "Friends don't mock each other's pain for entertainment." One of Jessica's companions, a brunette with nervous eyes, tugged at Jessica's sleeve. "Jess, maybe we should just go," she whispered. But Jessica was too proud, too used to being the center of attention to back down now. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you to lecture us about friendship? You don't know anything about our history." Dante's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture that made the temperature in the room seem to drop another 10 degrees. "You're right, I don't know your history, but I know what I just witnessed. I know that woman has shown more grace in the last 10 minutes than you've probably shown in your entire life." Behind them, Amelia had finished collecting the larger pieces of ceramic and was now trying to mop up the coffee with paper towels from the dispenser. Her movements were careful and methodical, but Dante could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept her head down to hide the tears she was fighting back. Without breaking eye contact with Jessica, Dante called out softly, "Miss, let me help you with that." Amelia looked up, startled. "Oh, no, sir, please don't worry about it. This is my job. I'm so sorry about the mess." The fact that she was apologizing, that she felt the need to apologize for being the victim of someone else's cruelty, made Dante's jaw clench. He moved away from Jessica's table and knelt beside Amelia, his expensive coat touching the wet floor without hesitation. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said gently, taking some of the paper towels from her hands. "This wasn't your fault." Amelia stared at him in amazement. In her 9 years of working in restaurants, no customer had ever helped her clean up a mess, let alone a man who was clearly wealthy and important. "Thank you," she whispered, "but you really don't have to." "I want to," Dante said simply. From the kitchen doorway, Mrs. Rose Patterson emerged with a mop and bucket, her weathered face set in grim lines. At 67, Rose had seen every kind of customer walk through her doors, and she had developed a sixth sense for trouble. She had been preparing to march out and defend Amelia herself when she saw the well-dressed stranger take charge of the situation. "Everything all right out here?" Rose asked, though her sharp eyes had already assessed the scene: the broken coffee pot, Amelia's tear-stained face, the group of overdressed women looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Just a small accident," Dante replied, standing and helping Amelia to her feet. "Nothing that can't be fixed." Rose's gaze moved to Jessica's table, and her expression hardened. "I see. Well, accidents happen, though some accidents seem to happen more often around certain people." Jessica finally seemed to realize that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. The man who had confronted her clearly wasn't going to be charmed or intimidated, and the cafe owner was looking at her like she was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "We should probably be going," Jessica announced, standing abruptly. "The weather's clearing up." "Actually," Dante said, his voice stopping her mid-step, "I think you forgot something." Jessica turned back, confusion and irritation warring on her face. "What?" "The apology you owe Miss Rodriguez." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Jessica's friends were already reaching for their purses, clearly wanting to escape, but Jessica herself seemed frozen between her pride and the growing realization that this man was not someone she wanted as an enemy. She began, then stopped, looking at Amelia with something that might be shame flickering in her eyes. But the moment passed, and Jessica's expression hardened again. "Come on, girls, let's find somewhere with better service." As they hurried toward the door, Dante called after them one final time. "Miss Collins?" His voice was soft, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that made Jessica stop with her hand on the door handle. "If ever I hear you treating Miss Rodriguez or anyone else with such disrespect again, you and I will have a very different kind of conversation." Jessica's face went pale as she finally understood exactly what kind of man she had been dealing with. Without another word, she pushed through the door and disappeared into the night, her friends trailing behind her like frightened birds. The cafe fell quiet again, but this time it was a peaceful silence. Dante turned back to Amelia, who was staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Dante replied, his voice gentle again. "I did."
2 weeks passed before Amelia found the courage to look at the business card Dante had left that night. She had tucked it into her apron pocket and forgotten about it until she was doing laundry, watching the small white rectangle flutter to the floor of her tiny apartment. The card was simple, elegant, just a name, D. Moretti, and a phone number embossed in gold lettering. She had stared at it for a long time, remembering the kindness in his dark eyes, the way he had knelt beside her to help clean up the mess without caring about his expensive clothes. But Amelia had learned long ago not to trust kindness from strangers, especially wealthy strangers who had no reason to care about a waitress from the wrong side of town. The card went into her kitchen drawer, buried beneath takeout menus and expired coupons. She told herself she would never use it. She had survived this long without depending on anyone else's charity, and she wasn't about to start now. But then, the hospital bills arrived. Carmen's cancer had returned with a vengeance, spreading faster than the doctors had anticipated. The treatments that had seemed manageable just months before were now beyond anything Amelia's insurance could cover. She sat at her kitchen table at 3 in the morning, surrounded by medical bills and past due notices, trying to make numbers add up that simply wouldn't cooperate. Even with her job at Moonlight Cafe and the weekend shifts she had picked up at a grocery store, she was drowning. The second mortgage on her mother's house was already 3 months behind. The electricity had been shut off twice. And now the doctors were talking about experimental treatments that cost more than Amelia made in a year. She had called every charity organization in the city, applied for every assistance program she could find. Most had waiting lists months long. Others required documentation she didn't have or qualifications she didn't meet. She was trapped in the cruel space between too poor to afford help and too proud to beg for it. It was Mrs. Rose who finally convinced her to make the call. "Child," the older woman said one evening as they closed the cafe together, "pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. Your mama needs help, and that man offered it. Sometimes angels come in unexpected packages." Amelia's hands shook as she dialed the number. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Dante Moretti." "Mr. Moretti, this is Amelia Rodriguez from Moonlight Cafe. You gave me your card and said to call if I ever needed anything." There was a pause, and Amelia's heart sank. He probably didn't even remember her. Why would he? She was just another waitress he had helped for a few minutes one rainy night. "Amelia," Dante's voice was warm, relieved even. "I was hoping you would call.
What can I do for you?" The kindness in his tone broke something loose in Amelia's chest. Before she could stop herself, the whole story came pouring out. Her mother's cancer, the mounting bills, the impossible choices she was facing. She cried as she talked, months of suppressed fear and desperation finally finding their voice. Dante listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Give me your mother's doctor's name and the hospital," he said finally. "I'll take care of everything." "Mr. Moretti, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. And please, call me Dante." The next morning, Amelia received a call from Carmen's oncologist. The experimental treatment had been approved and fully funded by an anonymous donor. Carmen would start immediately, and the hospital had assured them that all future care would be covered as well. Amelia cried in the hospital parking lot, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude, and the strange feeling that her life had just taken a turn she couldn't have imagined. It was there, sitting on a bench outside the cancer center, that she met Gabriella Thompson. "Rough day?" Gabby asked, settling beside Amelia with the easy familiarity of someone who had spent too much time in hospitals. Amelia looked up to see a young woman about her own age, wearing scrubs and a tired but genuine smile. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had the kind of face that invited confidences. "Actually, it's a good day," Amelia said, wiping her eyes. "A really good day. My mom just got approved for treatment we thought we couldn't afford." "That's wonderful," Gabby said, and she sounded like she truly meant it. "I'm Gabby, by the way. I work in oncology upstairs. I've probably seen your mom, Carmen Rodriguez." Amelia nodded, surprised. "You know her?" "She's hard to forget. She talks about you constantly. My Amelia this, my Amelia that. She's so proud of you." For the first time in weeks, Amelia smiled. "She's the strongest person I know." "Strength runs in families," Gabby observed. "I've seen a lot of family members come through here, and most of them fall apart. But you've been holding it together for both of you, haven't you?" They talked for an hour, and by the time Gabby had to return to work, Amelia felt like she had found something she hadn't even realized she was missing. A friend. Someone who understood the weight of caring for a sick parent, the exhaustion of trying to be strong all the time, the guilt that came with moments of happiness in the middle of crisis. Over the following weeks, as Carmen began her treatments, Amelia found herself looking forward to her conversations with Gabby almost as much as her visits with her mother. Gabby had a way of making even the sterile hospital environment feel warmer, more hopeful. It was during one of these visits that Dante appeared. Amelia was sitting in the family waiting area, reading a book while Carmen napped after her treatment, when she looked up to see him walking down the hallway. He looked different in the hospital setting, less intimidating, more human. He was carrying a small bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of genuine concern. "Dante," Amelia stood up, confused. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to check on your mother," he said simply, "and on you. How is she responding to the treatment?" "Better than expected," Amelia said, still trying to process his presence. "But you didn't have to come here. You've already done so much." "I wanted to." He echoed his words from that night in the cafe. "Would it be all right if I met her?" Carmen was awake when they entered her room, and her face lit up when she saw Amelia. "Mija, you're early today." "Mama, I'd like you to meet someone," Amelia said, suddenly nervous. "This is Dante Moretti. He's the one who helped with your treatment." Carmen's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Dante. "You," she whispered, "you're the angel who saved my life." Dante's composure cracked slightly at her words. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm just glad I could help." "Sit, please," Carmen insisted, patting the chair beside her bed. "Tell me about yourself. Any man who would help my daughter without expecting anything in return, I want to know who raised such a good heart." As Dante settled into the chair, Amelia saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. When Carmen asked about his family, his mother, she watched his carefully controlled expression soften with grief. "I lost my mother to cancer 2 years ago," he said quietly. "I would have given anything for someone to help us the way I was able to help you." Carmen reached out and took his hand. "Then you understand. You understand what it means to watch someone you love fight for their life." "Yes," Dante said, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, watching this powerful man hold her mother's hand with infinite gentleness, Amelia began to see past the intimidating exterior to the grieving son beneath. And for the first time since that night in the cafe, she allowed herself to wonder who Dante Moretti really was.
Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a transformation that seemed to touch everything in Amelia's world. Carmen's treatments were working better than anyone had dared hope, her color returning, along with her appetite and her infectious laugh. The hospital bills that had once seemed insurmountable were now just a memory, thanks to Dante's quiet intervention. But perhaps the most surprising change was happening in Amelia's own heart. It started with small gestures. Dante would appear at the hospital during Carmen's treatments, always with flowers or a book he thought she might enjoy. He never stayed long, never made a show of his visits, but his presence brought a warmth that seemed to accelerate Carmen's healing. He would sit beside her bed and listen to her stories about Amelia's childhood, his dark eyes softening with each tale of scraped knees and school plays and birthday parties celebrated with homemade cake. "He looks at you like you hung the moon, mija," Carmen whispered to Amelia one afternoon after Dante had left. "When you're not watching, his eyes follow you around the room." Amelia blushed, shaking her head. "Mama, he's just being kind. He feels sorry for us." "Pity doesn't make a man drive across the city every other day to bring flowers to a sick woman he barely knows," Carmen replied, with the wisdom that came from watching people for 62 years. "That man is courting you, whether you realize it or not." The idea seemed impossible to Amelia. Men like Dante Moretti didn't court women like her. They dated supermodels and socialites, women who graced magazine covers and charity galas, not overweight waitresses who lived paycheck to paycheck and had never owned a dress that cost more than $50. But then, Dante began asking her to dinner. The first invitation came on a Tuesday evening as they walked out of the hospital together. "Have you eaten?" he asked casually. "There's a quiet place nearby that makes excellent soup." Amelia almost said no. The voice in her head that had protected her for so many years whispered warnings about getting too close, about trusting too much. But something in Dante's expression, hopeful, almost vulnerable, made her nod instead. The restaurant was small and intimate, the kind of place where conversations happened in hushed tones, and the lighting was soft enough to make everyone look beautiful. Amelia felt out of place in her simple dress and cardigan, but Dante's attention never wavered from her face. "Tell me about your dreams," he said, over bowls of butternut squash soup. "Before your mother got sick, before the bills and the worry, what did you want for your life?" No one had ever asked her that question. Amelia found herself talking about the bakery she had always imagined owning, a small place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. She described the recipes she had collected over the years, the way she pictured herself greeting regular customers by name, creating a space where people felt welcomed and cared for. "You light up when you talk about it," Dante observed. "Your whole face changes." "It's just a silly dream," Amelia said, embarrassed by her own enthusiasm. "Dreams aren't silly," Dante replied firmly. "They're the only things that make life worth living." As the weeks passed, their dinners became a regular occurrence. Dante would pick her up after her shift at Moonlight Cafe, and they would drive to quiet restaurants where they could talk without interruption. He told her about his own childhood, growing up in a world where violence was currency and trust was a luxury few could afford. He spoke about his mother, Maria, who had tried to shield him from the worst of his father's business, but had ultimately succumbed to the stress and fear that came with loving a dangerous man. "She used to make bread every Sunday," Dante said, one evening, his voice distant with memory. "The whole house would smell like heaven. She said it was the only thing that made her feel normal, like we were just a regular family." "What happened to her?" Amelia asked gently. "Cancer," Dante said simply. "By the time we caught it, it was too late. All the money in the world couldn't buy us more time." Amelia reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I'm sorry." The touch was electric, sending warmth shooting up Dante's arm and straight to his heart. In his world, physical contact was either violent or transactional, but this gentle comfort from a woman who understood loss, was something entirely different. At Moonlight Cafe, Mrs. Rose watched the transformation in her favorite employee with knowing eyes. Amelia smiled more now, hummed while she worked, and had started wearing a touch of lipstick that brought out the natural beauty Rose had always seen in her. "That man's good for you," Rose said one afternoon as they prepared for the dinner rush. "I've been watching people for 70 years, and I can tell when someone's being loved properly." "We're just friends," Amelia protested, but her blush gave her away. "Honey, friends don't look at each other the way you two do," Rose chuckled.
That man's head over heels, and if you're honest with yourself, so are you. But even as Amelia's confidence grew under Dante's attention, the outside world remained hostile. Jessica Collins had not forgotten her humiliation at the cafe, and she had spent the intervening weeks gathering information about the man who had embarrassed her. When she discovered Dante's identity, her wounded pride transformed into something more dangerous: obsession. She began appearing at places where she knew Amelia worked, making snide comments to other customers about the charity case who thought she could land a rich man. She spread rumors through her social circle about Amelia's family, her background, her desperation. The whispers followed Amelia through grocery stores and doctors' offices, a constant reminder that some people would never see her as worthy of love or respect. "Let me handle this," Dante said when Amelia finally told him about Jessica's campaign of harassment. His voice carried the cold edge that had made him feared throughout the city. "No," Amelia said firmly. "I won't let you become someone you're not because of me. I've dealt with people like Jessica my whole life. I can handle her." But Dante saw the way the constant attacks wore on her, the way she second-guessed herself when they were together in public. He watched her shrink back into the defensive posture she had worn like armor for so many years, and it broke his heart. One evening, as they sat in his car outside her apartment building, Dante took her hands in his. "Amelia," he said softly, "I need you to understand something. What we have, this connection between us, it's real. It's not charity or pity or some kind of game. You make me want to be better than I am." "Dante, let me finish," he said gently. "I know my world is complicated. I know there are things about my life that would frighten most people, but when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human. You see something in me that I thought died with my mother." Amelia looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. Not the dangerous man the world feared, but the lonely boy who had lost his mother and spent years building walls around his heart. "I see you too," she whispered. "The real you." When he kissed her that night, soft and reverent under the streetlights, Amelia finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about deserving love or being worthy of it. Love simply was, unexpected and transformative, and utterly beyond logic. But as they held each other in the quiet darkness, neither of them noticed the car parked across the street, or the woman inside it taking pictures with a telephoto lens, her face twisted with jealous rage. Jessica Collins was about to make her final, desperate play.
The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper with gold embossing, delivered by a courier who waited for Amelia's response. She stared at the elegant script, reading the words 3 times before their meaning sank in. "Mr. Dante Moretti requests the pleasure of your company at dinner this Saturday evening at Le Bernardet. 8 o'clock, black tie optional." "What's that, mija?" Carmen asked from her chair by the window, where she was working on a crossword puzzle. Her color had returned completely, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. "Dante wants to take me to Le Bernardet," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the most expensive restaurant in the city." Carmen's eyes sparkled with delight. "Then we need to find you a dress worthy of the occasion." But as Saturday approached, Amelia's excitement was tempered by growing anxiety. Gabi had helped her find a simple black dress at a consignment shop, and Mrs. Rose had insisted on doing her hair and makeup. Yet Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something bigger than a romantic dinner. Her instincts proved correct when she arrived at Le Bernardin to find the private dining room filled with familiar faces, and not all of them friendly. Jessica Collins sat at a prominent table with her usual entourage, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Other faces from Amelia's past dotted the room: former classmates who had ignored her, co-workers who had dismissed her, neighbors who had whispered about her family struggles. "What is this?" Amelia whispered to Dante as he took her arm. "Trust me," he said quietly, his dark eyes intense with purpose. "It's time." Mrs. Rose and Gabi were there too, seated at a table near the front, their presence offering Amelia a small measure of comfort. Carmen had wanted to come, but her energy still flagged in the evenings, so she had stayed home with strict instructions to call the moment dinner was over. As the evening progressed, Amelia noticed the whispers, the pointed stares, the way conversations stopped when she passed. Jessica's voice carried across the room in carefully modulated tones, designed to sound casual, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just think it's fascinating how some people reinvent themselves," Jessica was saying to her table mates, "though I suppose desperation can be quite motivating." Amelia's cheeks burned, but Dante's hand found hers under the table, steady and reassuring. "Almost time," he murmured.
After the main course was served, Dante stood and gently tapped his wine glass with a knife. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. In his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he commanded attention effortlessly, but there was something different about his demeanor tonight, a gravity that even Jessica stopped her whispered commentary. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Dante began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "I know some of you are wondering why you're here, why I've gathered this particular group of people." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Amelia's face. "You're here because you all know this woman. Some of you have known her for years. Some of you went to school with her. Some of you have worked alongside her. And some of you have made it your business to judge her." The silence in the room was absolute. Jessica's face had gone pale, and several other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I want to tell you about Amelia Rodriguez," Dante continued, his voice growing stronger. "I want to tell you about a woman who has worked 3 jobs to pay for her mother's cancer treatment, a woman who volunteers at the animal shelter every Sunday, even when she's exhausted from working double shifts, a woman who has never spoken an unkind word about any of you, despite the cruelty you've shown her." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her head high, drawing strength from Dante's unwavering gaze. "I want to tell you about a woman who helped an elderly customer at her cafe every day for 2 months, driving him to doctor's appointments and grocery shopping because he had no family and she couldn't bear to see him struggle alone. A woman who gave her last $20 to a homeless veteran, then walked home in the rain because she couldn't afford bus fare." Several people in the room looked down at their plates, shame coloring their faces. Mrs. Rose was crying openly, and Gabi reached over to squeeze her hand. "You see, I've spent my life surrounded by people who measure worth in dollars and status symbols," Dante said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "People who believe that money makes them better than others, that beauty is only skin deep, that kindness is weakness. But this woman taught me something different." He turned to face Amelia fully, his expression soft with love. "She taught me that true strength comes from enduring pain without becoming bitter, that real beauty shines from a heart that refuses to hate, even when the world gives it every reason to, that the most valuable thing a person can possess is the ability to love unconditionally." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as he dropped to one knee beside Amelia's chair. "Amelia Rodriguez," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have shown me what it means to be truly human. Will you marry me?" The silence stretched for an eternity. Amelia stared down at the man who had changed her life, this powerful, dangerous man who was offering her his heart in front of everyone who had ever doubted her worth. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The room erupted. Mrs. Rose cheered, Gabi applauded through her tears, and even some of the other guests began clapping. But Jessica Collins sat frozen in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. As Dante slipped the ring onto Amelia's finger, a simple but elegant solitaire that caught the light like captured starfire, he stood and pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he whispered against her ear, loud enough for the entire room to hear. When they kissed, it was with the passion of 2 people who had found their home in each other. The applause grew louder, but all Amelia could hear was the beating of her own heart and Dante's whispered words of love. As they broke apart, Amelia looked out at the room full of people who had witnessed this moment. Some faces showed genuine happiness for her, others reflected shame for their past behavior, and a few, like Jessica's, burned with an anger that promised this wasn't over. But for the first time in her life, Amelia didn't care what they thought. She was loved, truly and completely, by a man who saw her worth when the world had been blind to it. The girl everyone had mocked was about to become the woman everyone would respect.
6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Amelia's kitchen, casting golden light across flour-dusted counters and the warm brick walls lined with mismatched chairs that Amelia had envisioned in her dreams. The bakery had been open for 3 weeks, and already a line of customers waited outside each morning for her fresh bread and pastries. Amelia stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, flour on her apron, and a smile that hadn't left her face since opening day. Carmen worked beside her, fully recovered and glowing with health, while Gabi helped serve customers during her breaks from the hospital. "The cinnamon rolls are almost ready," Mrs. Rose called from the kitchen, where she had taken on the role of head baker with the enthusiasm of someone half her age. "And we're going to need more coffee cake for the lunch crowd." The bell above the door chimed, and Amelia looked up to see Dante entering with his usual morning smile. He had made it a ritual to stop by every day, not as the feared crime boss the city whispered about, but simply as a man in love bringing flowers to his fiancée. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, leaning across the counter to kiss her cheek. "How's business today?" Wonderful, Amelia replied, her heart still fluttering at his presence even after all these months. Mrs. Patterson from down the street ordered 3 dozen cookies for her grandson's birthday party, and the Hendersons want us to cater their anniversary dinner. Dante's chest swelled with pride. He had offered to fund the bakery, but Amelia had insisted on taking out a proper business loan, wanting to build something that was truly hers. He had respected her independence while quietly ensuring that the loan terms were more favorable than they might have been otherwise. The bell chimed again, and this time Jessica Collins walked in, but she looked nothing like the confident, cruel woman who had tormented Amelia for years. Her designer clothes hung loose on her frame, her hair was unkempt, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. The bakery fell silent. Carmen's hand moved protectively toward Amelia, while Mrs. Rose emerged from the kitchen with a rolling pin still in her grip. Dante's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his body positioning itself between Jessica and Amelia. "Jessica?" Amelia said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "What can I do for you?" Jessica's hand shook as she approached the counter. I wanted to talk to you, to apologize, properly this time." "You don't need to," Amelia began, but Jessica held up a trembling hand. "Please, let me say this." Jessica's voice cracked with emotion. "I've spent the last 6 months watching my life fall apart, and I finally understand why." She took a shaky breath, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "After that night at the restaurant, after watching Dante choose you, I became obsessed. I hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on both of you. I was so angry, so humiliated, that I wanted to destroy what you had." Amelia's heart clenched, but she remained silent, letting Jessica continue. "But the investigator found something I wasn't expecting," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He found out about all the people you've helped over the years, the elderly man you cared for, the homeless veteran, the single mother whose rent you paid when she was about to be evicted. He found records of every act of kindness you've ever done, and there were so many." Jessica's composure crumbled completely. "And then he investigated me. Do you know what he found? Nothing. Not one act of genuine kindness. Not one moment where I put someone else's needs before my own. I've spent 30 years on this earth, and I've never once made someone's life better just because I could." The bakery remained silent, except for Jessica's quiet sobs. Even Dante's expression had softened slightly, though he remained alert. "I lost my job," Jessica continued. "Turns out when you spend your time spreading malicious gossip instead of working, people notice. My friends stopped returning my calls when they realized I had nothing to offer them but negativity. My fiancé left me when he saw who I really was underneath all the makeup and designer clothes." She looked directly at Amelia, her eyes red with tears and regret. "I've been alone for months, truly alone, and I finally understood what I put you through all those years. The loneliness, the pain, the feeling that you're not worth loving. I'm so sorry, Amelia. I'm sorry for high school, for the cafe, for everything. You didn't deserve any of it." Amelia felt tears prick her own eyes. The woman standing before her was broken, humbled, finally understanding the weight of her actions. But more than that, Amelia saw something she recognized, the desperate loneliness of someone who had never learned how to love or be loved properly. "Jessica," Amelia said gently, "thank you for apologizing. That took courage." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Jessica whispered. "Maybe not," Amelia replied honestly, "but I'm going to give it to you anyway, because holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it, and I refuse to let bitterness poison the happiness I found." Jessica's eyes widened in amazement. "How can you be so kind to me after everything I've done?" Amelia glanced at Dante, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Jessica. "Because someone once showed me that love is stronger than hate, that kindness is more powerful than cruelty, and because everyone deserves a chance to become better than they were." She moved around the counter, and to everyone's surprise, pulled Jessica into a gentle hug. "You're not the same person you were in high school, and neither am I. We both have the power to choose who we want to be from now on." Jessica clung to her for a moment, sobbing with relief and gratitude. When they separated, she wiped her eyes and managed a watery smile. "I don't know how to be different," Amelia admitted. "I don't know how to be the kind of person who deserves forgiveness." "Start small," Amelia suggested. "Find one way to help someone else every day. It doesn't have to be grand gestures. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness make the biggest difference." Jessica nodded, then looked around the warm, welcoming space of the bakery. "This place is beautiful. It feels like home. That's what I was hoping for."
Amelia said with a genuine smile. Would you like some coffee? And maybe a cinnamon roll? Mrs. Rose makes the best ones in the city. As Jessica sat at one of the mismatched tables, sipping coffee and eating pastry while talking quietly with Carmen about second chances and redemption, Dante pulled Amelia aside. You continue to amaze me, he said softly. She's suffered enough, Amelia replied. And besides, showing mercy doesn't make me weak, it makes me free. Dante cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes shining with love and admiration. Have I mentioned lately that I'm going to marry the most incredible woman in the world? Only every day, Amelia laughed, leaning into his touch. The bell chimed again, and this time it was Father Miguel from the church down the street, followed by several of Amelia's regular customers. The bakery filled with the warm buzz of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and the sound of genuine laughter. As the morning progressed, Amelia watched Jessica slowly begin to relax, even managing to smile when Mrs. Rose brought her a second cinnamon roll on the house. Carmen was telling stories about Amelia's childhood to anyone who would listen, while Gabi helped serve customers with the efficiency of someone who had found her calling. At noon, Dante reluctantly prepared to leave for a business meeting, but not before pulling Amelia into the kitchen for a private moment. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Dante, you don't need to keep buying me things, Amelia protested, but he silenced her with a gentle kiss. This isn't from me, he said, pulling out an envelope. Amelia's eyes widened in confusion. But she wrote it before she died, Dante explained, his voice thick with emotion. She made me promise to give it to the woman I chose to marry if I ever found someone worthy of the Moretti name. With trembling hands, Amelia opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was elegant, but shaky, clearly written by someone fighting illness. To the woman who captured my son's heart. If you are reading this, it means Dante has found something I always prayed you would. True love. I know my son's world is complicated and sometimes frightening, but I also know his heart. He is capable of great love and fierce loyalty, just as his father was. Please be patient with him. He has seen too much darkness and may struggle to believe he deserves the light you bring. But love him anyway, with all your heart, because a man like Dante, when he loves completely and forever. Take care of each other. Build a life filled with laughter and kindness. And if you are blessed with children, teach them that true strength comes not from power or money, but from the courage to love unconditionally. Welcome to our family, daughter of my heart. Was all my love, Maria Moretti. Amelia was crying by the time she finished reading, and when she looked up, she saw tears in Dante's eyes as well. She would have loved you, he whispered, just like I do. I love you too, Amelia replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. As they held each other in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the scents of fresh bread and cinnamon, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The girl who had been mocked and rejected had become a woman who was loved and respected. The waitress who had served others had found someone who wanted to serve her happiness for the rest of his life. But more than that, she had learned that her worth had never been determined by other people's opinions. She had always been valuable, always been deserving of love. It had just taken the right person to help her see it. 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Amelia Rodriguez became Amelia Moretti, in a ceremony at the small church where she had volunteered for years. Carmen walked her down the aisle, radiant with health and joy. Mrs. Rose served as matron of honor, while Gabi stood beside her as bridesmaid. Even Jessica was there, having slowly rebuilt her life through acts of service and genuine kindness, now working as a volunteer coordinator for a local charity. As Dante lifted her veil and looked into her eyes with wonder and devotion, Amelia knew that every moment of pain, every tear shed, every cruel word endured, had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. You are my heart, Dante whispered as they exchanged vows. My home, my peace, my everything. And you are my miracle, Amelia replied, the man who taught me that I was always worthy of love. When they kissed as husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers for applause. But all Amelia could hear was the beating of her own heart. Finally at peace. Finally home. Later, at the reception held in the garden behind the bakery, as they danced under twinkling lights while their friends and family celebrated around them, Dante whispered in her ear, "Are you ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Moretti?" Amelia smiled,